Welcome to the Bootloader. I'm Todd Kurt.
And I'm Paul Cutler. This is episode 5. The show works like this. Todd and I each have brought 3 things to share with you. We'll spend a few minutes talking about each, but no more than 5. If you want to learn more, we have detailed show notes available at thebootloader.net. And give us a follow on Twitter at thebootloader while Twitter's still alive. Todd, why don't you get us started?
All right. So, Arduino and MicroPython? What? So, if you watch the Arduino blog at all, you might have seen that there is a MicroPython IDE that was put out by Arduino Labs. So it's not by Arduino, it's by Arduino Labs, which is kind of this new thing that they've created. And it works. It's just the short answer is it works. If you play with MicroPython and you want to give it a try, give it out, go ahead and try it out. It's basically like a very simplified version of what you get with these other things like Thonny and Mu. Um, it's very clean. The icons are very well designed, and it looks very usable. It's not restricted to just the MicroPython boards that Arduino sells. It seems to work with any MicroPython device. And it's basically just 2 windows, your code editor and a little like serial terminal slash REPL window on top of each other. And the code editor has syntax highlighting, kind of like what you'd expect. And so it's your basic frill, like no frills, just like let's get going. Um, and so that's the good part. The bad part is that it's because it is it's a really a first step. It's just the editor and the REPL. There's no, if you're used to Arduino, you're used to things like library managers and board managers and a serial plotter, things that help you sort of manage a larger project. And there's none of that. There's really not much of that in the MicroPython world anyway. So it's not really that much of a miss. Also, it's an Electron app. This is one of the reasons why I think they're able to put it out so quickly. Is it's an Electron app, which is this web framework you can use to write web pages that look like or that act like desktop applications for multiple platforms. I use it a lot. It's really great, but it is essentially another version of Chrome on your desktop, and you already probably have a couple of other Electron apps on your desktop as well, like Discord and Slack and all this other stuff. So it's pretty much our OSs are turned into just glorified browser runners.
Yes, they
and
are.
and and the problem with Electron apps is they're usually pretty big because browsers are very complex beasts, and there's a lot of stuff in there, and it's really hard to pare them down because of just the nature of how web browsers work. And so it's pretty big, like when the download is like 180 meg or something. So it takes a couple of seconds to start up. You'd think like, oh, it's such a simple program, it should just come up instantly. It's like, well, it could, in another world, perhaps, or somebody finds the really cool way of slamming Electron apps into very small packages, then maybe we'll get that. And so yeah, go ahead and try it out. If you've never played around with IDEs for MicroPython, there's a couple others that are things to look at if you're into this. One's called Thonny, Thonny. It's seen to be loved by a lot of people. I find it unattractive and confusing. um, Another is Mu, and it's a much cleaner interface. It seems to be trying to be most like Arduino for MicroPython or CircuitPython. It's got a very good serial plotter, which is really handy because a lot of times in microcontroller projects, you like want to just read a sensor and spit out a bunch of values and kind of see what the shape of those values look like. And so in Arduino, you just do like serial.print and the number, and then you open up the serial plotter and you get a nice cool graph. Mu has that also.
And Mood just came out with a new version. 1.12 was released just this past Sunday.
That's right. Yeah, because there's been some changes with CircuitPython, which it also supports, where CircuitPython can give you like this meta information about the Wi-Fi network it's connected to and other kind of and the version and stuff. And so Mu can accurately track that and display it nicely for you. But my preferred choice, all these IDEs, I'm not a really IDE guy. I use a text editor and I use Pico tool, which is the command line tool that Raspberry Pi makes to let you inspect and copy files and twiddle with your Raspberry Pi Pico that's running MicroPython. I don't really play with MicroPython on other boards much. Like if you're doing like the ESP based MicroPython, there's like a web REPL that kind of does similar stuff, and there's cool things that hook into that. I know nothing about that. What I do not recommend if you're into MicroPython is any of these like extensions for VS Code or Atom or whatever. The ones I've tried, they just kind of screw up your VS Code install and kind of pollute your using doing normal Python stuff. I don't know if it's just my inexperience with this world, but in my kind of general distaste for most IDEs. I would say just go ahead and use Moo or Thonny or this new MicroPython by Arduino. It seems to work well.
I read 4 or 5 different stories talking about this launch of MicroPython on Arduino, and like you said, it's Arduino Lab, so it's their experimental arm
Hmm.
of Arduino. But is Arduino committing to anything? Are they saying that all their boards going forward will be MicroPython compatible as well? Are they trying to make it more of a first-class citizen, or is it still, do you think, just in that experimental stage?
I think it's purely just an experiment. Like there's a lot of noise, a lot of press around MicroPython and CircuitPython, and Arduino doesn't want to be left out. I think, and they see a lot of their customers moving to a simpler way of doing microcontroller things. Like in the same way that Arduino was a really simplified way of dealing with microcontrollers 15 years ago, instead of setting up the BSP and the custom IDE that was made by the vendor, the chip vendor that had no knowledge of your particular board. You could just install Arduino, and you could get to blinking an LED in 5 minutes versus like a whole week that it would take you normally. And so I think in like that sort of simplicity that Arduino promised, um, you still want, but now our expectations of what simple is has gone a lot higher. Like now we want really high level languages like MicroPython, or like there's these embedded JavaScripts and stuff now. And so I think this is just them kind of playing around, seeing how far they can go. Like, oh, let's see, what does MicroPython do for us? And there are some of our customers might want to use it, and because our Arduino's gotten really into industrial and like sort of commercial embedded stuff. It's really funny. They've moved away in a lot of cases from the original teaching tool that Arduino was. Like now they've got some really serious boards that can run like almost a full OS. And so in that case, a really high level language makes a lot more sense.
Well, that's a good one. My
You know,
first one this week is Home Assistant. We had mentioned Home Assistant in passing in a past episode when we talked about the Matter smart home standard that was just finalized. Well, Home Assistant is Matter compatible, and on November 13th, they hosted a State of the Open Home live stream where they took a look back at everything Home Assistant has done for the last year, where the market has gone. They talked a little bit about Matter. Then they also looked forward to what's coming next year. What did they want to work on? So, if you haven't played around with Home Assistant, it's really a home automation platform focused on local control and privacy. There's no vendor lock in. It works with Matter, it works with Zigbee and Z Wave. There's something like 1900 different integrations for hardware and software that it can play around with. It's absolutely amazing. It was the second most contributed to GitHub repository in the past year, which I thought was interesting, second
wow.
only to VS Code. So it shows you how many different people are actually submitting their different integrations that they've done. 190,000 instances of Home Assistant have opted into telemetry reporting, and they estimate that there's probably 500 to 600,000 total installations of Home Assistant out in the wild. That's pretty darn impressive for an open source and free software project.
Yeah, and especially for one that's not that easy to get going. Like it's a Raspberry Pi thing, which is like already kind of a barrier to a lot of people. And I mean, I think you can run it on a desktop computer, but all the real installations I've seen have been on Raspberry Pis.
Yeah, it's really recommended to run on a Raspberry Pi. Looking forward, they have declared that 2023 will be the year of voice. So I got to give them credit. They looked at where Home Assistant is, they looked at the other platforms, and that's one area where they're not quite up to par with some of the competition out there, whether it's Alexa or Google or Siri. So they've hired Michael Hansen, who is the lead developer of the Raspy voice assistant, which has a lot of similarity to Home Assistant. It can function offline. It's entirely free and open source under a permissive MIT license. It can be run disconnected from the internet, and it works well with Home Assistant already, though it could be some of those integrations could be improved. It's optimized to work with MQTT and HTTP and some WebSockets, and supports over 25 different languages already. That's going to be pretty cool when you start thinking about those low cost ESP devices. Just add a microphone, and can you add a customize your wake word, and now you can place those little microphones all over the home, especially with those ESPs having Wi-Fi connectivity.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was watching some of the videos on the Raspy. That's RHASSPY. It's a nice little play on the like like a Raspy voice and Raspberry Pi, um, and seems to work really well, and it's doing it all locally. Like all these other voice assistants, well, even Siri to a large degree, it uploads essentially your voice wave file to some cloud service that you have no control over, and who knows what it's doing with that audio. Um, where now this is all like totally in your control, totally on your network. You can not even connected to the network and have it work. If you want to do a totally local install, that's amazing. I don't have any voice based things in my house because of this. I don't trust them. And
I
this all I'd like to try out.
I don't either, and I'm right there with you. I did back a Kickstarter a couple years ago from Mycroft, which is finally shipping after years of delays, and
Mhm.
I'm hoping that I can try Raspy on it. It already has some kind of voice assistant built in, but being open source, I'm sure I can probably swap it out.
Yeah, yeah, cool.
What's your next one?
All right, so have you ever breadboarded up little electric circuits? You got the little like yeah, you get a little grid of holes, and you stick components in the holes, and you like make LEDs blink with transistors and resistors and capacitors. It's a lot of fun. There's a problem though with that, and that's that you have to have those things. And so there's this cool little website called withdiode.com, and created by this guy named Kenneth Castle, who also created this really interesting little Vim tutorial if you want to learn the Vim editor. Um, I first saw this announced by Clive Thompson on Mastodon. Uh, the With Diode site is a breadboard and electrical circuit simulator. So you take like little wires and you plug them into the breadboard holes, and you take a little resistors and plug them into the holes next to the wires and transistors, and you can make a little blinking LED, and it's got a little virtual battery pack you plug on. And you get to choose where on the breadboard holes that things get to be plugged in. It's all in 3D, so you can like spin the breadboard around to see it for different angles, which is really handy because it's easy to get lost in kind of the nest of wires in a breadboard as you start to add like make a circuit of any complexity. And so I played with it for like half an hour, and was able to implement some of the little oscillator circuits that me, Carlin, and Barb Noren made in early 2020. We had this little YouTube Twitch show called Deep Fried Neurons, where we got together once a week and we talked about and did little projects. And a couple of weeks, the projects were little transistor oscillators that each of us breadboarded up and tried to do something creative with it. And there's this really common oscillator called a astable multivibrator, which is two transistors and essentially two capacitors and a couple of resistors. And with that, you kind of slosh charge back and forth between the two capacitors using the transistors to blink LEDs. And this little simulator thing can do it. With diode, can simulate all that, and you can actually change the values of the resistors and get the blinking to change and have it be a fade instead of a blink. And it's pretty neat. I must say, it's kind of fascinating to see what's possible in the browser nowadays. It's just like every time I see one of these crazy 3D things in the browser, it just kind of blows me away. Um, there is a problem though with it, and that breadboards are actually kind of hard to use if you've never come across them before. So at first I was thinking, oh, this might be a really great way to teach breadboards to someone who doesn't have a breadboard. It's better than not having anything with to teach, but I think there's this extra level of obfuscation of having it be this little 3D object in a browser window, where with a real breadboard, you can grab it and look at it and sort of poke around, um, and that's really instructive. But it's harder to do that with this 3D virtual environment. Also, I think they missed a trick where one of the things I've noticed when I've taught electronics is how to teach people to learn what the different rows of the breadboard rows, like how they're connected, and like these rows are connected, but these columns are not connected, and the two rows are in parallel, but they're not connected to each other. And so trying to explain that and get students to understand that is hard. And they could have highlighted that somehow in the simulator, which they don't do yet. This is like a very new project, so maybe it'll be changed to do that. Um, So that's with diode. If you're looking for things that are kind of like this, but different on different axes, I'm a real fan of this thing called the Walkwi simulator. It's WOKWI. It is aimed at letting you simulate Arduino projects, and MicroPython and CircuitPython, and so you can run little versions of the Raspberry Pi Pico, and you can like load an Arduino sketch onto it and have it, blink. It's got virtual buttons and virtual pots and virtual LEDs and stuff, and LED and LCDs. Um, there's also, if you want to like just visualize a breadboard circuit, there's fritzing, Fritzing. That's good for just drawing up a breadboard circuit. It actually knows about the connectivity of a breadboard, so it'll let you kind of teach you how breadboards work. And the bonus of that is that also, while you're wiring things up on the breadboard, it's also wiring them up in a schematic view if you want to look at that. So you can then switch over to the schematic view and kind of clean it up, clean up the layout, and say, oh, look, I've got now a schematic of the thing I just breadboarded. So yeah, so that's with diode. I recommend checking it out. It's at least fun for an afternoon.
And that's exactly what it was. I hadn't heard of it until you shared it, and I was playing around with it, and the next thing I know, probably a half hour went by, and I had
Yeah,
all these different things placed on. It was just a ton of fun.
totally. Okay, so what's your number two this week?
I wanted to talk about GitHub again, but as a quick follow up to my GitHub story from a couple episodes ago, that lawsuit investigation about GitHub Copilot, the AI pair programmer, has been filed. So there is an actual class action lawsuit filed in the state of California
Ooh.
for that. So it'll be something to keep an eye on. I've linked to a couple of the news stories for that in the show notes. But if you like Copilot and you really believe in it as a solution, GitHub Universe was held earlier this month, which is their annual conference,
Mm-hmm.
developer conference. And one of the things that they debuted from GitHub Labs, their experimental arm, is Hey GitHub. And you, and it's probably exactly what you think it is, a voice assistant way to code. So imagine being able to code hands free. This could be huge for accessibility. I had minor hand surgery a couple months ago, and that was the first question I asked the doctor: is how can I type right away? And thankfully I could, but for someone who can't, what's really neat about it is it uses natural speech. So if you're creating a Python program using pandas, for example, you can say import pandas, and the result will be import pandas as PD. So the program knows of the right way to actually import a library in Python, for example. So I'll link to the demonstration that GitHub has on their page, but it's pretty cool. And in the features that they show how you can write and edit code, which is using GitHub Pilot behind the scenes or GitHub Copilot behind the scenes. You can say things like, go to the next method with code navigation. Hey, GitHub, go to line 34. Or, hey, GitHub, go to method X. Or, one of the ones they call out that I thought was really cool was code summarization. Ask, hey, GitHub, to explain lines 3 through 10 and get a summary of what that code does. Or you can actually just run a program and control your IDE using any VS Code command using your voice. So that's when we start thinking about what the next generation of IDEs are, like we were just talking
Mm-hmm.
about, this really takes that to that next level.
This is really fascinating, especially the explanation capability. I would love it if Copilot turns into a opt-in thing where maybe it's part of a new license. Like there's a new MIT open source license that's MIT with AI reconstitution or whatever, and because like this has a great benefit for uh like pedagogical reasons, like I need to understand code and have it talk to me. I want to talk to the thing and I want to have it talk back to me, and you can kind of almost pair program with this AI just by using your voice, which I think could be really interesting.
I agree.
Also, I there was a guy I worked with like 20 years ago whose RSI was so bad he had to hire a person to do all of his typing for him. And so he would sit there and he would have essentially like an intern level person in front of him, and he just would like say things to like add this line, add this line, and this was like I think he was doing it all in the C or C++, and it was over time. This person clearly had the typing person had to be technically savvy enough to know how to use editors, run compilers, but over time they almost became like pair programming because the person, the typer, kind of knew what he would want when he would say things like import pandas, and he would fill out the entire syntactically correct thing to type.
And now you're going to have it as your AI pair programmer.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, this could be a huge boon for people with accessibility issues, because I've had a few RSI issues, but it's not been nearly as enough to make it so that I just can't type. Imagine if you just couldn't type; that'd be terrible. So,
What's your next one for us?
have you ever wondered how people make these virtual synths or audio effects that are in these audio programs? Like, you've got, your things that act like an old synthesizer, or they act like a guitar pedal, or even like real synths. How does one make a real big modern synthesizer? And one of the tools people use is this thing called Max, or Max MSP, and it's a graphical sort of programming environment. These I call it nodes and flows. You got these boxes that indicate a function, and then a line between the boxes that indicate sort of data flow. And so one example might be, say, a box that's a wave file, and a flow is the audio coming out of it, and then it's going into another box that's, say, a delay effect, and then that's going out to another box that's, say, the output to your headphones. And then, like, the input to the very first wave box might be, what pitch should the wave file be played at? And so you hook that up, and that's a MIDI flow, say, to a keyboard. And so now you just made a sampler. Press a key on a keyboard, that flows into the first box, that starts the wave playing, that goes into the delay effect, it makes the wave go bump, 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 bump. And you now made a little synthesizer. And so that's what Max can do. You can just like go click a click, make a couple little boxes, connect them together, and then you can put a custom UI on top of that to make it look like whatever you want. So if you've got a great idea for a new guitar pedal or a new like synthesizer, you can have your own knobs and your own graphic design. And all of this lives inside the Max environment, or it could live inside of, say, Ableton Live. Like Ableton Live includes Max as part of its thing, and but the things you create have to always kind of live inside of live inside of Max. I've used this off and on since like the 90s. There's a long history of Max as a thing, and so it's really kind of like, look in the Wikipedia entry at some point for it. It's got a really long and storied history. It's very fascinating. But just a few days ago, maybe last week, the company that makes Max, Cycling 74, released RNBO, or Rainbow, which in short is a way of turning your Max patches into VST plugins, i.e., you can like compile them down into a thing that you can then use for in any other program that can do audio stuff. But it's not just that; it can also be compiled down to a thing that can run on a Raspberry Pi, or it can be compiled down to a thing that runs in web audio on a web page and can be controlled with JavaScript. And so the same sort of thing, where you can make this like custom UI'd audio effect or audio generator, you can now run on like all these different systems. It's kind of nuts. It's like, I'm so used to Max being this little walled garden where you can make these amazing things, but they're kind of stuck in the world of Max. And now you can kind of pull it out and let it be free.
Yeah, if you can export to VST, you can put it into Logic. Audacity's recent release that just came out a couple of months
Yep.
ago uses VSTs for the first time ever.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's
All these all,
exciting.
all these all these video production things like OBS or Final Cut or whatever also can deal with VSTs, I think. Um, there's even an online class you can buy from the Music Hackspace to teach you how to use RNBO now. And to be truthful, R RNBO Rainbow isn't exactly Max. It's like kind of a parallel universe Max, because they had to make things. Max is a very text-based, strangely a very text-based environment, and so they had to make some like sort of a mirror universe of the Max objects to make them work in a purely sort of numeric way. But for most part, you don't really notice that. You just kind of like copy the Rainbow version of the Max object you want to use. And so if you're a Max person, it'll look very comfortable to you. You just kind of like copy and paste, and pretty much you're done. But it is expensive. It's a for-pay thing. It's like $300 for a permanent license, or $10 a month if you just want to try it out and see how it works. It is independent of Max, I believe. Although if you buy Max, a Rainbow comes with it. And the fact you can target Raspberry Pis are pretty cool, because normally Max only runs on Mac or Windows. Um, Now, if you're like, bah, all this commercial software, I want something free, good news. There's this thing called pure data that's been around as long as Macs because they come from the sort of the same source, and it's the same sort of thing. It's a graphical nodes and flows based programming language where you connect together boxes with lines, and it looks a little rougher. It's open source, looks a little rougher, but it runs everywhere. Runs on a Raspberry Pi. I think I had one that ran on my phone at one point. There's also a huge community of patches already created for PD that you can play with. Um, I've only played with PD a little bit. Our Hackerspace Crash Space for a while had a PD, like a monthly PD meetup, where people in Los Angeles would get together and like talk about how to use pure data to like do stuff. And one guy had a Raspberry Pi guitar pedal that he made out of using PD. And
That's
so,
awesome.
yeah, so it's not like this rainbow stuff is anything new per se, but it's sort of new in the sense of like, here is this like big company that's doing the sort of shiny version of this idea and making it so you can just kind of go, boom, here's a VST of the thing. And it turns out there's even a compiler for PD patches. This is something I just learned today. It's called Heavy, and it's an online thing. I've not tried it out yet, but apparently you can compile. Yeah, you can compile down PD patches in a similar way to what Rainbow's doing. I don't know how it works. I might try it out after this show, but
I'll
like
try it out and report back.
exactly right. All right. So what's our final thing for today?
Our final one is just a couple of quick links about Mastodon. So we joked at the top of the show that Twitter's dying, and it's it's sad for me. It's actually the one social media that I kind of liked.
Yep.
So I'm
Agreed.
sad to see it go, and I'm sad to see it implode in real time. So you and I are some of the ones that have made the migration over to Mastodon, and Mastodon's different than Twitter. So for people who are thinking that it's just going to be a Twitter clone, that's not what it is. So the first article is Hope for a Post-Musk Net. So that really talks about the federated nature of
Mm,
Mastodon and how it's decentralized. So that's a really good primer for that. The next two articles, one from Sage Sharp and one from Sumana, both talk about how important it is to do a little research about which instance, which server you want to join, to understand, do they have any technical problems in the past? What kind of speech do they offer? Who are the admins and how many admins and what's the uptime and those kind of things. So just, things to put in the back of your head if you're thinking about joining Mastodon. And if you are, the last two articles, one from Les Pounder at Tom's Hardware and one at Wired from Justin Pott, are both how to move from Twitter to Mastodon and how to get started. So good articles. I'm enjoying Mastodon. I like the fact that I can follow hashtags, for example.
mhm.
Makes it easy to follow along to a couple of different topics. But it's not Twitter, and nor should you expect it to be Twitter.
Yeah, yeah. We our hackerspace back in 2018 when there was the other sort of big kerfuffle with Twitter. A lot of us started moving to Mastodon or see if we could move to Mastodon, and me and Carlin set up a crash space Mastodon instance server. Just to see if we could, to see how hard it would be. And it turns out it's pretty easy to set up your own Mastodon server. It's even easier now because there's a sort of uh, uh, what do you call it? A hosting service called Mastodon.host or something, where you pay them like $6 a month, and they'll just like maintain your Mastodon server for you, and you can just have your own. If you want to have Paul Cutler at floopy.pizza, as your Mastodon handle, you could have that. But it turns out there's a couple of different management issues. Well, I guess the hosting service solves with the big management issue, which is keeping things updated. So it's not like anything on the internet, it has to be continuously updated. The other is this sort of political management of like one of the things with Mastodon Federation is that the servers talk to each other. There's no one central server, and servers can have opinions about other servers. Like, oh, there's the server full of all the rude jerks. Let's just like not federate with them. You can just choose to do that. Blunk, and you just remove them from your feed. And you can do that on a personal basis. Like I could do it, you could do it, but the server admin can just make the decision. You know what? I think we should just not even allow any of these people to even see our users really. And so that's really interesting. But it also uh, if you have users on your system that aren't you then maybe have to make that decision for the group,
Right.
and so we because of these management issues, we ended up turning off the crash base incidents. It might be time to revisit that. Nowadays I would say pretty much pick one of the ones that the Mastodon, the join Mastodon.org recommends to you. They're all pretty good. Um, they're all pretty well maintained by people that will keep them up and have sort of good ability to keep out the creeps.
Yep, to manage the server, which is a challenge. There's too many internet trolls out there.
Yeah, yeah, and um, yeah, it's been really fun to sort of like experience the net the way it was almost back when I first joined Twitter back in 2006. So I didn't really have a need for it back then. I've been really enjoying Twitter these last couple of years. I felt like they've really had started to hit a good stride on how to make the product get better, and it's just kind of tears me up that like it seems to be going away very fast.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm at Toddbot at Mastodon.social.
I'm PR Cutler at fostodon.org. So I went with one of the free and open source ones.
Yep.
It also lets me put little cool emojis after my name. So I've got a little Python emoji after my name,
Very cool.
which is one of the things the servers can do is have custom emoji. So
Yeah,
it's really easy to look at the API calls for that. I'll have to put a link into a couple of those as well.
totally. Yeah, that's yeah. I'd say the short thing, if you're worried about joining a Mastodon instance, a Mastodon server, just join one. It's kind of like email addresses. Like some people really care that they've got at mycustomdomain.com, and some people just don't care, and they will just use at gmail.com. And so you can use one of the big Mastodon servers if you want.
And they make it a breeze to switch servers. So don't
Yes.
feel that you're that you're locked into one once you choose it.
Yeah, I'm on my I think fourth server, and you can just move all your followers over, and all your old posts on the old server still stay, and so it's not like you're deleting anything. Nothing really, unless you explicitly delete it. So yeah, I would say just try it out and see what happens.
So give us a follow on Mastodon. That's our show. Thanks for listening. For show notes, transcripts, and to support the show, visit thebootloader.net. Until next time, stay positive.
Bye.